Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hi everyone. In the last video I discussed about the parts of female reproductive system. So today I am going to discuss the internal structure of the ovary. So I already know that where exactly the ovaries are located. The two ovaries are located in the lower abdominal cavity, one on each side, and they are almond shaped structures. Okay. Now how many ovaries are there? That they are paired, alva? They are paired, right? So there are two ovaries are present. They are located in the lower abdominal cavity. The surface of each ovary is covered by a single layer of germinal epithelium. So the surface of each ovary is covered by a single layer of germinal epithelium, and this germinal epithelium cell, the cells of this epithelium, no, they are cuboidal in shape. So each ovary is covered by a single layer of germinal epithelium, and this epithelium is made up of cuboidal cells. The cells of germinal epithelium are cuboidal in nature, and below the germinal epithelium there is a presence of this connective tissue layer. So connective tissue layer, this connective tissue layer is called as tunica albuginea. So what is this layer called? It is tunica albuginea. Inner to tunica albuginea, the entire thing what is present inner to the tunica albuginea, no? So the entire thing it is called as the stroma. So what it is called? Ovarian stroma. So the stroma is differentiated into two zones. So the stroma is differentiated into two regions. So inside the ovary what is present, that is inner to the tunica albuginea, it is called as what? The ovarian stroma. The stroma is differentiated into two regions. See this outer region, outer peripheral region of the ovary that lies immediately below the tunica albuginea, no? So this part of the ovary it is called as ovarian cortex. So what it is called? Ovarian cortex. Outer portion is called as what? The outer peripheral portion is called as the outer cortex or ovarian cortex. Then the central region. So from here to here, the central region it is called as the medulla region. And what is present in the cortex region and what is present in the medulla region? See here, so this is what the cortex region, no? So in the cortex region are present a dense connective tissue along with some collagen fibers, some stromal cells, and here you can see the presence of number of follicles. So these are called as what? The ovarian follicles. Okay. So in the cortex region present are the ovarian follicles. So these follicles are in different stages of development. So in the cortex follicles are present, and these follicles are showing the different stages of the development. And when it comes to the inner medulla region, so inner medulla region, no, so it is having a loose connective tissue, it is having elastic fibers, blood vessels, nerves, lymph vessels, okay, along with some smooth muscles also present in the inner medulla region. So you will come to know what is present inside the ovary, that is it is differentiated into two zones, right? So what is present in the outer cortex region? So in the outer cortex region it is having dense connective tissue, collagen fibers, stromal cells, and the follicles in different stages of development. And what is present in the medulla region? That's made up of loose connective tissue, elastic fibers, blood vessels, nerves, then lymph vessels along with some smooth muscles also present in the inner medulla region. Okay, so this is what present in the ovary. And let us discuss the folliculogenesis, that is the development of follicles. Okay, so that's called as folliculogenesis. So folliculogenesis means it is the process of growth, development and the maturation of follicle is called as what? Folliculogenesis. So what is folliculogenesis? Folliculogenesis means a growth, development and the maturation of follicles is called as folliculogenesis. So where this folliculogenesis process takes place? The folliculogenesis process will occur in the outer cortex region. So the growth, development and maturation of follicles will occur in which region of the ovary? That is in the cortex region of the ovary, not in the medulla region. And when does this folliculogenesis process begin? That is at the time of this folliculogenesis process, no? So it will begin before the birth only. Before the birth, that means what? During the fetal life, embryonic life. See, both in females, the ovaries will develop during 11th to 12th week of pregnancy. So both the ovaries in the females will develop during fetal life only, that is during the 11th to 12th week of the fetal life, that is 11th to 12th week, nearly 3 months of pregnancy. Okay, so when the ovaries will develop, the ovaries will develop during the 11th to 12th week of pregnancy, that is 11th to 12th week of the fetal life. Okay, the folliculogenesis begins during early fetal life only. So it is because, see, this is germinal epithelium, no? So the germinal epithelium is made up of which type of cells? Cuboidal cells, right? So this cuboidal cells, these cells of this germinal epithelium, no? Some of the cells of this germinal epithelium will differentiate. So they become larger and they start dividing mitotically. So they start dividing mitotically and produce more and more number of oogonia. So the some of the germinal epithelium cells become larger and they start dividing mitotically and produce more and more number of oogonia. So what are all the oogonia will develop? No, they develop during early fetal life only, and no oogonia will develop after the birth. Okay, so once the oogonia forms, they migrate to the cortex, and this mass of oogonia is called as what? Egg nest. What it is called? Egg nest. It is called as egg nest. So here, the oogonium once it forms, so it starts accumulating the nutrient material and it grows and it enlarges, it increases in size, and it starts meiosis cell division. So it starts meiosis, you know that meiosis cell division will occur in 2 steps, right? That is meiosis first and the meiosis second. So this oogonial cells, once they form, they increases in size, they start growing and increase in size and start its meiotic first cell division. So meiosis first cell division will begin, but meiosis first cell division will not complete. It get temporarily arrested at the prophase first. Meiosis first will not complete. It begins here. Okay, it begins but it will not complete. Where it get arrested? The meiosis cell division get arrested during the prophase first of meiosis first. Okay, at this stage, this is called as what? The primary oocyte. What it is called? Primary oocyte. So what is meant by a follicle? I said so many follicles are present in the cortex. They are in different stages of development, right? What is a follicle? So follicle is nothing but a oocyte surrounded by granulosa cells. So what is follicle? So oocyte surrounding the granulosa cells is called as follicle. See, oogonia, when they start meiotic cell division and get temporarily arrested, so at this stage that cell it is called as primary oocyte, and this primary oocyte gets surrounded by, initially it gets surrounded by a flattened cells, see this is what? The primary oocyte. Okay, so what I have written here, no, this is the primary oocyte. So this primary oocyte gets surrounded, initially it gets surrounded by flattened epithelial cells. Okay, so this is called as what? The primordial follicle. So primordial follicle is nothing but what? Primary oocyte surrounded by a layer of flattened epithelial cells. So that is called as primordial follicle. Now the flattened epithelium cells, no, so gradually they become cuboidal in nature. So they become cuboidal and they get arrayed as a single layer of granulosa cells around the primary oocyte. So that follicle is called as what? The primary follicle. What it is called? Primary follicle. So primary follicle is characterized by the primary oocyte surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. Right. So this primary follicle. So the number of primary follicles develop during fetal life, no? About millions of primary follicles will develop in the fetal life. Nearly 2 to 3 million follicles will develop in the fetal life, but all of the follicles will not mature. Okay, so all of the follicles will not mature. So as millions of follicles will develop, no? So the follicles, so many follicles, most of the follicles will degenerate from birth to puberty. Right. So that degeneration of follicle, it is called as follicular atresia. What it is called? What it is called? Follicular atresia. Follicular atresia means degeneration of follicles. Okay, the follicular development, the number of primary follicles during fetal life is, it is 2 to 3 million. Okay, but gradually the most of the follicles, they gradually degenerate from birth to puberty. Okay, so at the time of puberty, the number of primary follicles left in each ovary is only 60,000 to 80,000 follicles. So how many follicles will left in each ovary at the time of puberty in females? Out of 2 to 3 million, how many are produced? 2 to 3 million follicles are produced, but how many are left at the time of puberty? Only 60,000 to 80,000 follicles will left in each ovary, and remaining follicles, no, they all degenerate. Okay, so this degeneration of the follicles is called as what? The follicular atresia. What it is called? Follicular atresia. So what is the significance of this follicular atresia? See, the main significance of this follicular atresia is to limit the number of oocytes released by the ovary, because the females, no, the females during a reproductive phase in the sense that is from menarche to menopause. Menarche means beginning of reproductive cycle, whereas menopause is the ending of the reproductive cycle. So between menarche to menopause, she is able to release only 400 to 450 secondary oocytes. So she is able to release only 400 to, out of beginning the 2 to 3 million at the time of puberty, how many are left? 60,000 to 80,000 are left. So in that she is able to release only 400 to 450 secondary oocytes during her reproductive phase, that is from menarche to menopause. Okay, so only one ovum is released during every menstrual cycle. So during every menstrual cycle, only one ovum is released alternatively by the 2 ovaries. So in order to reduce the number of oocytes released by the ovaries, so most of the follicles will, degeneration of the follicles will take place. So that degeneration is called as what? The follicular atresia. Right? So what is the significance of follicular atresia? To reduce the number of oocytes released by the ovaries. So that is what? Follicular atresia. So at the time of puberty, the only follicles left are 60,000 to 80,000. So the females during a reproductive phase, she is able to produce only 400 to 450 secondary. She is able to release only 400 to 450 secondary oocytes. Now, so this is what happens during the fetal life. The maturation of follicles will begin at the time of puberty. So when does follicular maturation will begin? So it is at the time of puberty. So this is because of the release of hormone, that is follicle stimulating hormone. So follicular maturation is because of the FSH hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. So when the follicle stimulating hormone act on the follicles start maturing. The follicles will start maturing. Okay, so the primary follicles under the influence of FSH hormone. So initially the primary follicle, it is having a primary oocyte surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. No, so this primary follicle will grow and develop into a secondary follicle. So it is because of which hormone? FSH hormone. Okay, so here this granulosa cells surrounding the primary oocyte, no, they proliferate, they multiply and increase in number and become more number of granulosa cell layers. Okay, so initially the primary oocyte is surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. No, here in secondary follicle the primary oocyte gets surrounded by many layers of granulosa cells. Okay, so here the more number of granulosa cells are formed due to the multiplication or the proliferation of these granulosa cells what present in the primary follicle. Okay, so now in the secondary follicle the development of Tika also takes place. Okay, so the secondary follicle is characterized by the primary oocyte surrounded by more number of granulosa cells and a Tika, newly formed Tika. Okay, now the secondary follicle will grow and develop into a tertiary follicle. So here in the tertiary follicle, so the tertiary follicle is characterized by a presence of cavity that is called as antrum. So in the that is in the tertiary follicle, so during transformation of secondary follicle into tertiary follicle, a cavity starts appearing in between the granulosa cells. Okay, so this initially that cavity, no, it is smaller in size, it is a crescent shape, but gradually it start increasing, gradually it becomes larger, and this cavity is called as what? Antrum. So here you can see the cavity here. So this is what? The cavity, that is the antrum, and that is filled with a fluid that is called as liquor folliculi. So what is the fluid present in the antrum? That is liquor folliculi. So that is secreted by the surrounding granulosa cells only. Okay, so that liquor folliculi, it is rich in estrogen hormone. So and in the tertiary follicle, what primary oocyte present? No, it completes its meiosis first. So it get arrested at the prophase first. No, so when the meiosis first will complete, the meiosis first will complete once she attains puberty, and it is in the tertiary follicle. So the primary oocyte present in the tertiary follicle completes its first meiosis and transform into a secondary oocyte. Okay, and here the Tika layers form. No, so the Tika layers, they get differentiated into two layers, that is Tika Externa and Tika Interna. Okay, so tertiary follicle is characterized by the presence of a fluid filled cavity that is called as the antrum. Okay, now this is not the a matured follicle. So the matured follicle, the tertiary follicle will finally grow and develop into a matured follicle. This matured follicle, it is called as what? The Graafian follicle. Okay, so what is this follicle called? Graafian follicle. The fully matured follicle is present in the ovary is called as what? Graafian follicle. So this is what the structure of a Graafian follicle. So the tertiary follicle will develop into a Graafian follicle. What membrane, that is granulosa cells present in the tertiary follicle, no, they rearrange themselves, forming more layers are added to this, and with the enlargement of the antrum cavity. So finally the tertiary follicle will gradually changes to form a mature follicle that is called as what? The Graafian follicle. This is what the structure of Graafian follicle. So what is present in the this is important. Graafian follicle is the structure of Graafian follicle is very important, and what are all the layers present? You have to remember the layers of Graafian follicle. See what is present in the Graafian follicle? Primary oocyte or secondary oocyte? It is secondary oocyte. So the oocyte present in the Graafian fully matured follicle is the secondary oocyte. Okay, so this secondary oocyte, it starts its second meiosis. But it is also not completed its second meiosis, but it also get temporarily arrested at metaphase second. Okay, so that's why after ovulation secondary oocyte is released. It's not ovum. So it is still in the secondary oocyte. Why this is still in the secondary oocyte? Because it has not yet completed its second meiosis. So then when does it will complete its second meiosis? So it will complete its second meiosis at the time of sperm entry during fertilization. Okay, but still it is in secondary oocyte. Okay, so this secondary oocyte, so this is the nucleus of the secondary oocyte and it is covered by its own plasma membrane, that is called as the oolemma. Then this secondary oocyte forms immediately to its outer surface, it forms one more layer that is called as the Zona Pellucida. So surrounding the secondary oocyte is the Zona Pellucida. So this is what the Zona Pellucida. It is a glycoproteinaceous layer. It is a glycoproteinaceous layer. It contains glycoprotein. And next to the Zona Pellucida is a corona radiata. So immediately to the secondary oocyte is the layer Zona Pellucida formed by the secondary oocyte. Next to Zona Pellucida is a layer that is called as corona radiata. So this corona radiata is formed by the surrounding granulosa cells only. Okay, so the secondary oocyte, it is covered immediately. It is covered by Zona Pellucida, and after the Zona Pellucida is the corona radiata. Then next is this oocyte, no, the secondary oocyte, it gets suspended in a cavity, large fluid filled cavity. So this cavity, it is called as what? The antrum. So this antrum is filled with a fluid that is called as what? The liquor folliculi. What is the fluid called? It is liquor folliculi. So this fluid is secreted by the surrounding granulosa cells only, and it is rich in which hormone? It is rich in estrogen hormone. And see this, immediately after the antrum cavity, there are granulosa cells are present. More number of 3 to 4 layers of granulosa cells are present. They are arranged in the form of a membrane, so it is called as membrana granulosa. So what is this layer called? 3 to 4 layers of granulosa cells arranged around the antrum cavity, that is called as what? The membrana. This is called the membrana granulosa. Okay, so some of the membrana granulosa, you can see here, some of these membrana granulosa cells, no, they project into the cavity of the antrum and connecting the corona radiata. So this mass of cells connecting the membrana granulosa with the corona radiata is called as what? The cumulus oophorus. What it is called? Cumulus oophorus. Then next to the membrana granulosa is a basement membrane. So this is the basement membrane. Then next to the basement membrane, the 2 theca layers are present. So the theca layers are arranged in the form of outer and the inner. The outer is called as the Tika Externa. So the outermost layer of the Graafian follicle, it is a fibrous layer. This is called as what? The Tika Externa. Tika Externa is a fibrous layer. Below the Tika Externa, there is one more layer that is called as Tika Interna. Tika Interna. So this is a highly vascularized layer. This is rich in blood vessels, and it is a glandular in nature. So secretory in nature. So it will secrete. So this Tika Interna has a receptor for LH hormone. The LH hormone will act on the Tika Interna, and under the influence of that LH hormone, the Tika Interna will secrete androgen. Which hormone is secreting? Androgen hormone. Okay, androgen, it is a male sex hormone. Okay, secreted by Tika Interna. But so this androgen, no, they get diffused into the granulosa cells. Then the granulosa cells will convert the androgen into estrogen. Okay, Tika Interna will not secrete estrogen, instead it secretes androgen, but the androgen gets converted into estrogen by the granulosa cells with the help of aromatase enzyme. Okay, so granulosa cells, the receptor, the FSH will act on granulosa cells, whereas LH will act on Tika Interna. So under the influence of LH hormone, the Tika Interna will secrete androgen, and the androgens gets converted into estrogen by the granulosa cells, okay, by the aromatase enzyme. So this is what Tika interna. So Tika externa and Tika interna. Tika externa is fibrous layer, whereas Tika interna is a glandular layer which secrete which hormone? Androgen. But granulosa cells will convert the androgen into estrogen. So this is what the structure of mature Graafian follicle which undergoes ovulation. So from inner to outer, what are the layers present in the Graafian follicle? I repeat once again. See here, what is present in the central region? So actually the secondary oocyte, no, it is not placed exactly at the center. It is little away from the center. It is eccentric in position. Okay, so this is the secondary oocyte covered by its own plasma membrane, that is oolemma, and again it is covered by a single Zona Pellucida glycoproteinaceous layer, that is Zona Pellucida. Zona Pellucida, it is immediately surrounded by a layer of corona radiata formed by the surrounding granulosa cells, and this is what the cumulus oophorus which connect the corona radiata with the membrana granulosa. So this is what the cavity it is called as what? Antrum, which is filled with a fluid that is called as liquor folliculi, which is rich in estrogen secreted by the granulosa cells, and surrounding the antrum is the 3 to 4 layers of granulosa cells. This layer it is called as membrana granulosa. So outer to membrana granulosa there is a layer that is called as a basement membrane. Next to basement membrane is a Tika layers. Tika interna, it is highly vascularized and glandular layer. Next outer to the Tika interna is the fibrous layer that is called as the Tika externa. So you have to remember the layers from inner to outside. This is what the structure of Graafian follicle, and this Graafian mature follicle will undergoes ovulation. So ovulation means what? Ovulation means the release of a secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle. So during ovulation what happens? The Graafian follicle will rupture. What causes Graafian follicle to rupture? The Graafian follicle will rupture because of LH hormone, luteinizing hormone. See here, folliculogenesis, that is the maturation of follicles, will occur at the time of puberty, right? Under the influence of which hormone? Follicle stimulating hormone, right? So when the FSH acts on follicles, so the follicles start maturing. So how the follicles, they start increasing the size by accumulating more and more granulosa cells. So this developing follicle only will secrete another hormone that is called as estrogen. So I already said during the functions of primary sex organs. What are the functions of primary sex organs? One is the production of gamete and another one is the production of sex hormones, right? Okay, so what are the sex hormones secreted by the ovary? Estrogen and the progesterone, right? So estrogen is secreted by which cells then? Granulosa cells, okay, so which are present in the follicles. So okay, so estrogen is secreted by the developing follicles, that is the granulosa cells of the follicles. So as the granulosa cells start increasing, so the secretion of estrogen will also start increasing. So once the estrogen level goes to a peak level, high level, okay, the increased concentration of estrogen that triggers the anterior pituitary to release a hormone that is called as LH hormone. So what causes the release of LH hormone? Increased level of estrogen causes the release of LH hormone from the anterior pituitary, and this LH hormone goes to a peak level during the middle of the menstrual cycle. That is usually during the 14th day of the menstrual cycle, the LH hormone level goes to a peak, high level. So that is called as what? The LH surge. Okay, so it is due to LH surge, the Graafian follicle ruptures. Okay, so the Graafian follicle what? Ruptures. So due to the rupturing of Graafian follicle, the secondary oocyte is released. So after the rupturing of Graafian follicle, the secondary oocyte is released. So this release of secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle is called as what? Ovulation. So ovulation will occur which day of the menstrual cycle? That is the 14th day of the, usually on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. Okay. So this is what? Ovulation. So ovulation, it is because of which hormone? LH hormone. Now once the Graafian follicle ruptures, the secondary oocyte is released, what is left? Like what is left here? You can see here some granulosa cells are left, Tika interna, Tika externa cells are present. So the remaining ruptured Graafian follicle cells, they transform into another structure that is called as yellowish body, that is called as corpus luteum. Okay, so the corpus luteum is formed from the ruptured Graafian follicle. So corpus luteum is a yellow body. Why it is called yellow body? It is yellow in color. Why it is yellow in color? It is because of the presence of a lutein protein. So what is present in the corpus luteum? So there is a presence of lutein protein in the corpus luteum. That's why it is yellow in color. So this corpus luteum, once it forms, it continues to grow for few days and it acts as a temporary endocrine gland. So it starts secreting the two hormones. One is progesterone and another one is the estrogen. So okay, so it secretes more and more amount of more progesterone and it secretes only a small amount of estrogen. So it continues continue in the secretion of progesterone and the estrogen hormone. Suppose if the fertilization occurs, if the fertilization, so secondary oocyte is released, if this secondary oocyte get fertilized, the pregnancy results. Okay, so if the pregnancy continues, that corpus luteum will continue to grow for another few months and start secreting the progesterone hormone, which is necessary for the maintenance of the endometrium lining of the uterus. Suppose if the pregnancy will not occur, if the fertilization will not happen and the pregnancy will not occur, the corpus luteum will remain for another 14 days. Okay, and it get degenerate. Okay, so if the pregnancy will not occur, the corpus luteum it's degenerate. It turns into a whitish mass of a fibrous tissue. So that is called as what? Corpus albicans. What it is called? Corpus albicans. So if the pregnancy will not occur, the corpus luteum will changes to form a whitish mass of fibrous tissue that is called as the corpus albicans. Right? So this is what the internal structure of the ovary and the folliculogenesis. Where the folliculogenesis process will be, when the folliculogenesis will begin, where folliculogenesis process will take place, how the follicular development will take place, what are all the hormones involved, what causes the ovulation, so what happens after ovulation, that is the fate of Graafian follicle, corpus luteum, and finally the corpus luteum will turns into albicans. Okay, so this is what the detailed information regarding the folliculogenesis. In our next video, I am going to discuss the oogenesis, that is the formation of female gamete, that is the egg or the ovum. Okay, understood? Thank you.